Hello, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to another new video. We are in another new location for this one. Don't get used to it because this is not going to be a common setting. It's simply because I recorded this video already and for whatever reason my computer decided to corrupt that video file and I don't know what happened. I have an external hard drive that apparently decided not to work either. So, long story short, I recorded this already and then now it's gone. So I need to re-record, which is fine because I felt like I didn't really. It was kind of really really off the cuff, as most of these are going to be, but in a way that I didn't like. It was a little too rough. So as you've seen the thumbnail and the title of this video, today I'm going to be talking about a book, specifically Life and Death by Stephenie Meyer. And for those of you that did not know this book existed, like I didn't know it existed, this book actually came out in 2015. As you can see, it's the Twilight Reimagined 10th. Oh, I said 12th. 10th anniversary edition. So Stephenie Meyer decided to write that as, the celebration of Twilight's 10th anniversary. And I wanted to start this off giving a little bit of my history with Twilight and Stephenie Meyer. So when Twilight came out in 2005, close to 2006, that was at the height of my vampire obsession. Excuse me. So between 5th and 6th grade, I was really that was the height of my interest in vampires, and I would go to the school library, check out all the books that I could find on vampire lore and vampire mythology, and I was reading a lot of fiction books as well, but most of them were kind of adventure type mystery stories. And they were all your typical vampire, can't enter someone's home without being invited, stake to the heart, can't go outside, sleep in coffins, your very standard vampire mythology. So when Twilight came out, I was a preteen, 12 years old, in Barnes and Noble, and I saw that book on the shelf with the iconic cover with the apple. I was drawn to it, as a little emo kid in middle school. And so, yeah, I read the cover, and that was the start of my Twilight obsession. So, as the books were being released, I was reading them as they were being released. I was super into them. I remember when the first movie was announced. I remember going on Stephenie Meyer's blog because she would update with list of actors that she thought would be perfect for the roles. And so we could see her cast list up there, and I would get so excited seeing who she picked, even though knowing what I know now as an adult, yeah, she had no, and she even said yeah, I don't have any bearing on who becomes who's cast as who, but it was exciting for me as a middle schooler. And it was so bad, just to let you know the how big of a nerd I was. I and my friend group at the time, we would have impromptu book club sessions in our chorus class almost every Friday, where we would read certain chapters and we would come in and discuss them as a group, and we would talk about the chapters, talk about the plot, the characters, and we would write on the board different plot points, what we thought was going to happen in the next few chapters, of course the standard Team Edward versus Team Jacob. I'm going to preface this now with I was Team Edward. I was not a fan of Jacob when I was younger. Now my thoughts might have changed slightly, but yeah, when I was growing up, I was Team Edward all the way. So I say all that to set kind of the foundation for what this review is going to be, because when I often see people talk about the Twilight series, whether it's books or the movies, people tend to come at it from a perspective of they're adults now, first reading the book as adults, and they have no interest in it at all. They already go into it knowing oh, this is going to be terrible. Whereas I wanted to go into it kind of objectively, and also as someone who read the books when they were first being released, and I was in that target demographic. I was a preteen / teenage girl. I was the target demographic for these books. So I thought it would be fun to kind of revisit them in a way. Now, let me be very clear, I have no intention of reading the Twilight series from beginning to end again. uh, I fell off the Twilight train after the first movie was released, which is shocking, I know, considering what I just told you. I pre ordered my movie ticket. Like, I pre ordered it and I went to the first showing of Twilight that was at my local movie theater, and I was so disappointed in that movie that I completely, like, gave up on the Twilight series, and I lost all interest in reading any more about Twilight. And like, because of that, I still have not seen all of the movies. I've heard how terrible they are. I still have not seen the rest of them. I have not revisited the books since then, like all those years ago. I actually donated all of my Twilight books a couple years back. I donated them to like a Goodwill. So I have no way of even rereading them. And like, of course, yes, I could buy them again or like check them out in the library. But again, I have no intention of rereading the Twilight series. But I thought it would be fun to like visit books that I had not read before. And so I just happened to be online maybe a couple months ago, maybe just a month ago. What is time? So about a month ago, I think I was just online, like browsing, and someone made a comment like, oh, did you guys know that like Stephanie Meyer made a gender swapped version of Twilight? And that piqued my interest because I had no idea that Life and Death even existed. And it came out again in 2015. I had no idea that she wrote this book. But apparently it exists. And of course, once I learned that it existed, I had to pick up a copy. And that's where we are today. So I picked up a copy of Life and Death and I read the entire thing in a couple days. Back in the day, I would have had this finished in a day. But now that I'm an adult that has like work and responsibilities, I don't have time to just sit and read a whole book. So I broke it up into like 2 or 3 days. But still, I will say, to this book's credit, it had me coming back. Like, whenever I had downtime, I was willingly picking this book up and continuing it. Like, I didn't feel forced to read this book. Like, I very much picked this up of my own volition. And as you can see, also, there's no, like, sticky notes in here, because this is not going to be an in-depth chapter-by-chapter breakdown, if that's what you want. I don't know why you would want that, but if that is what you were looking for, sorry. It's not going to be like a chapter-by-chapter plot analysis of Life and Death. If you have read Twilight, or if you've seen the Twilight movie, you know what this book is about. So I will just start off by saying that, like, this book is pretty much exactly Twilight with very minor alterations. And again, I haven't read Twilight in several years, so I could be misremembering things, but the overall plot seems to be exactly Twilight with just some minor changes. So, instead of Bella, our main character is Beau Swan, who I found myself actually liking a lot more than Bella. And as I'm recording this, I still have not come to the conclusion as to why. Because Beau suffers from the same problems that Bella suffers from, and that he is just like a blank canvas. He just exists in this universe as like a vessel. He has no personality, he has no hobbies, no goals, no nothing. He's just very bland, average, boring, basic, almost like non-person. He's like a non-human. I don't even know how to explain it. And Bella suffered from much of the same problem, where she was just kind of there. She just existed in this world, and she was telling this story, but it's like she wasn't even a major part of the story. Things were just happening around her and to her, and she was just there. So I don't know why I feel a stronger connection to Beau than I did to Bella. The only thing I can kind of think is that I remember when I read Twilight, I could never connect to Bella. She was never my favorite character, and I never felt any connection to her, and I think it's because she was so bland and, like, boring that there was nothing to grab onto. Like, you couldn't relate to her in any capacity because she just wasn't, like, a normal person. Whereas Beau, you still get that, but for some reason, he seems a little bit more interesting. And maybe that's because he's not just like there. He does have more interactions with people. So if you've read Twilight and seen the movie, you know, Beau moves from Phoenix with his mother to Forks to live with his father. And so he gets to Forks, and that's another point we'll come back to. You didn't mishear what I said. Keep that in mind. So he starts school, and the same thing happens that does in Twilight. All these girls have some weird obsession with him, which again, I don't understand why, because he's so boring. They're all obsessed with him. And I don't know, but the difference between Bella and Bo, though, which is what I'm getting at, is that he's a lot more rude. He's very rude and like nasty and pretentious and very like above it all in a way that I don't remember Bella being exactly. And you would think that would be like a negative, but since he's such like Bella was such a boring character, it's refreshing to like have that in Bo, that like, oh, he's kind of nasty. He's kind of mean to people that are supposed to be his friends. So I don't know, maybe that's another reason why I'm like, there's something here. It never gets fully fleshed out, of course, because we know Stephenie Meyer, we know how she writes. It doesn't get any further than that, but it's just like, just a little breath of fresh air, she gives you little crumbs to keep you reading. So yeah, he's very like arrogant in a way that I don't quite understand. There's nothing we know about him, so it doesn't make his arrogance make any sense. She kind of like alludes to him being smart in some capacity, or at least like well read. But again, we never really see him reading. There's like one scene in the book where he's like skimming through Moby Dick, but like we never see him show an interest in books. We don't see him show an interest in any of his classes. And he has no hobbies, and he has no goals, and he has no friends, because all the people that try to befriend him, he treats them like garbage, like they don't matter. And from the beginning, he's like very judgmental of people. Like he describes them in a way that it doesn't really make sense based on the fact that he just met them. It's like he already hates people for no reason, and they're very nice to him. Like I said, all the girls are obsessed with him and vying for his attention and affection. And I don't understand why, because he's supposed to be very boring. But yeah, that's Bo. That's our main character. And as I said in the beginning, Life and Death is a gender-swapped version of Twilight. So, of course, everybody's switched around. And that means everybody. So, like, even minor characters that we only see maybe, like, one or two times are swapped, except, so I said we're going to come back to this, except for Charlie and Renee, which, if you remember, those are Bella's parents. In this version, Bo's parents. I was highly confused, and it started to irritate me as I kept reading, because I couldn't understand Stephenie Meyer's decision to leave them the way they were when she went out of her way to change even minor characters. How hard would it have been to make Charlie now Bella's mom and Renee now the dad? Like, how hard would that have been? The story would have still been largely the same. And it wouldn't have been so confusing, because I couldn't understand. Like, when, in the beginning, when he moves and he's just like, yeah, I'm leaving my mom, and I realized it was the same mom, like the same name. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to stay with Charlie. I'm like, so this is exactly just like from Twilight. You didn't even bother to change that around for some reason? And it's not like it has any bearing on the plot. Like, don't think like, oh, she like twisted things at the end, and it has no bearing. She could have switched them around very easily, because they don't matter. And that's one of the major issues with this book and with Twilight, and probably like the entire Twilight series, is that so many characters just don't matter. They're so, like, bland and boring. They're just there as, like, filler. Like, you have to have parents, so they're there, but, like, they don't have much of a personality. Like, Charlie, I will say, has somewhat of a personality, sort of. Stephenie Meyer does this thing where she, like, wants you to, like, get something from these characters, so she just tells you what it is instead of you actually, like, coming to that conclusion based on, you know, their interests and their actions. So, like, she wants you to know, like, oh, Charlie's, like, you know, he's a cop, and he's nice, and he likes fishing. That's really all I know about Charlie. Like, yeah, there's nothing there. And I will say that also about the Cullens. So, the other major player in this book is, of course, Edward. In this book, it's Edith. And that brings us to the vampires, the Cullens, and the Hales, who are all swapped around in this, of course. They are equally as boring, and that shocked me, because I remember when I first read Twilight, being very intrigued by the Cullens and the Hales, like, very intrigued by, like, the whole vampire backstory, of course, because I was into vampire mythology, but I was, like, very interested in, like, how Stephenie Meyer was handling, like, her version of vampires, because I'd never seen that before, and I remember I really connected with, like, Alice in Twilight. I liked Alice and Rosalie and Jasper. And in this book, they're all very just one-dimensional, one-note. They matter in this story because they have, you know, like, they're important to the plot, but like you could literally interchange them and I probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And like Bo always constantly will say like they were so nice or they were so this, but it's like what is nice about them? They're treating you like normally. Like your friends treated you, but you didn't like them, but because these people are vampires are nice. It's it's so convoluted. But yeah, they're like very cookie cutter, like they don't really have much personality, especially the parents. So she does switch the Cullens. Like Carlisle is now I think Carmine. I don't remember. It's how insignificant they are. I'm not remembering. Kareen, that's what it was. Kareen. So Carlisle is now Kareen. And then like Esme is now Ernest. But they don't matter. They're just like you there's like Kareen is still a doctor, but it's like it's just like they just felt so boring. And the star player in this story, which made me go on like the next line of thinking that I have, is Edith. Because Edith is the only character that gets like any type of attention and like that you feel somewhat of a connection with. And it's because Bo, and we know this from Twilight, Bella is so obsessed with Edith that she becomes his universe from like the minute that he sees, like again, because he has nothing going on in his own life apparently by his own choice, that he's so immediately drawn to Edith that like his entire being becomes consumed by like learning as much about Edith as possible. So Edith is the star of the story, even though Bo is our narrator. Like Edith is the one that shines through. And I remember that from Twilight, like Edward being like, that's probably why I was so Team Edward, because we learned so much about him. He's like the most interesting part of the story because he's the only one that gets like any characterization, any growth, any kind of change. We know so much about him. So yeah, Edith in this book, I liked Edith. And I also think I like this a little more than Twilight, even though, like I said, it's the same exact story, just because it kind of subverts that trope a little bit. Like I said, Twilight was written for like preteen teenage girls, so it's the standard like, you know, oh, girl falls in love with vampire. But I kind of like the subversion of that. Like I like that Bo, this like male protagonist, is the one that's like falling in love with Edith, this like elusive vampire. I think that was pretty cool. I don't know. The subversion of the trope, I think, is what kept me engaged and what maybe made me, like, give this a little more credit than it probably deserves. So, yeah, it was just, I don't know, it pretty much is, the ending is different, of course. That's the one plus I can also give this, is that the ending is completely different, being as though Life and Death is a singular story, whereas Twilight, of course, is a series that stretches along several books. And I think this plays more to Stephenie Meyer's strengths, because Twilight, I don't think, needed to be 4 books? I don't think it needed to be stretched out that long because there's so many plot holes in that book and things that don't make sense, and the end gets like so convoluted. And this, even when I read it back then, I remember I hated the ending of the Twilight series. Like it was all over the place, and I think Stephenie Meyer like really suffered from having so many different plot points going on that she never really wrapped up in a way that felt satisfying. Whereas this, you know, from beginning to end, you get the single story, and the ending feels satisfying in a way that Twilight did not. Like, you know where it's going, and it gets there, and it's just like, okay, nice. Like, that was a nice progression. So I will give Life and Death that much credit. It's just thinking about this book. Like I said, I read it. I don't know how I feel about it. I'm conflicted, because I kept picking it up to keep reading, knowing what the story was going to be, because it really is like a direct copy of Twilight, but then there was like little mini changes that kept me interested. Like she did change some of the dialogue, but then in other instances she kept some of the same exact lines in, which confused me. Like she changed that one line which I've always hated, which you heard in the movie, where Bella says in her head like, oh, I was utterly and irrevocably in love with him. I've always hated that line. It's so cheesy. So she does alter that line in this book in a way that it flows a lot better and it sounds better. But then she keeps that stupid, like, oh, and then the lion fell in love with the lamb line when Edith and Bo are in the meadow and she's, like, walking out into the sunlight for the first time. Like, she keeps that line in. And for some reason, even though I know this is the exact, like, way that Twilight went, it does not fit here. And it's because Edith and Bo are just, like, they're different enough from Edward and Bella where I can't picture her saying the same thing that Edward would say, if that makes sense. So it really did feel like shoehorned in, and like it did not work. Which brings me to another issue I have with this book, which is the names and the dialogue. Okay, starting with the names. most of the names make sense. Like the swaps, like the names are regular names, just nothing crazy. Like Jacob is also in this swapped. But his role is very minor. Jacob barely matters. Jacob in Life and Death becomes Julie, and again, Julie does not matter to the story. The werewolves are a very minor part of the story. They don't really come into play at all until the end. So yeah, Julie is not very important to the story. But for sake of, just having Julie is Jacob. But when it comes to Cullens and the Hales, their names are so bizarre. It really gave me like Ebony, Darkness, Dementia, Ravenwave vibes. Because like when I read their names, it just made like my skin crawl. It was giving me very like fan fiction vibes. Like these can't have been the names. And I don't care if they're vampires. Because I know that's really, it's like, oh, well, I don't care. Because in Twilight, they had normal names. Like Alice and Jasper and Rosalie and Edward. They were normal names. They weren't that out of the like box that like people would say, well, that doesn't make sense. In this, the names are weird. And I will look for them in the beginning because they were just so strange. Like, the Cullens, I really didn't understand why they had those names. I don't know why I'm bothering to like flip through this and see if I can find them. They're just all really bad. Yeah, Royal and Jessamine and Archie and Eleanor. Like Archie, Eleanor, I don't know. I had a problem with the names. I felt like it was just too much. I had a problem with that. And the way they talk, which I know I wasn't willing to give her any leeway for the names, but I'm willing to give it for the dialogue because sometimes Edith talks in a way that's very bizarre. Stephenie Meyer has always been one of those writers that you can tell like thumbs through the thesaurus and like switches words out so they sound like better, but they don't sound better. They just sound like you went through a thesaurus because nobody talks that way. This book has that problem because Edith talks in a way that is very weird, but I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt because I guess she's like, she was born in turned in the 1900s, so I guess it makes sense that her dialogue is so weird, but Beau, it does not make sense because he's just your average 17-year-old boy. And I don't know, this is another reason I felt like the pretentious vibes from him, because he's like too good for dances. He's too good to be friends with the people in his school, and he talks in a way that I can't imagine a 17-year-old talking. Like nobody else around him talks that way besides the Cullens, and this is like before he met them. So, like I said, I get that she wants us to think he's like well-read, but we're not given any reason to believe that. And so the way he talks just makes him sound very pretentious. It's just certain words, like certain bits of dialogue, and that's one of my pet peeves is when dialogue doesn't flow naturally, and that happens a lot in this book where it feels very stilted or like strange and jarring. Like, I don't know, if I can't picture a conversation like that happening in my head, then it just ruins the moment for me. So I had a lot of those moments in this book where I had to like pause and look at a word, like who would say that in this kind, like who would use that word. So yeah, that's generally, I did take a couple notes because like I said, I had the misfortune of this original recording getting, yeeted by my computer system. And I wanted to make sure that I like touched on all the points that I had with this book. So yeah, I really touched on most of it. That like it's kind of boring. It's very much Twilight, but for some reason I don't hate it. And that's the confusing part about this is like as much as I just talked about all the things I didn't like, I don't hate this book. Would I read it again? Probably not. See, I think that's the catcher. Like, would I read this again? Most likely I would not. But do I regret reading it once? No. I thought it was fun. It was a fun little read. It was a good way to reread Twilight without actually having to reread Twilight because it was different enough that I still felt like I was reading a new story, but it wasn't completely different in the sense of like I knew where the plot was moving. I knew where things were headed. And like I said, I did appreciate that the ending was different. I mean, it's predictable. You know what's going to happen in the end. But I appreciated it for what it was. And I think that's what I can say about the whole Twilight series is like I appreciate it for what it is. Like, for the books that they are, I appreciate them. And when I was younger, I loved them. I was very obsessed with these books. And looking back, like I said, as an adult, they're fun. They're fun to just like, you want to read something that's not too challenging, that will keep you engaged, even if it's just like for comedy. It's a good book to pick up. So yeah, I read Life and Death, um, which is just the first part of what I'm planning to do next, which is because I picked that up, I couldn't stop myself from picking up another one, and I think you probably have guessed where I'm heading with this. Yes, I did also pick up Midnight Sun because I remember when this got leaked years ago. When like the first, I think it was like the first chapter got leaked, and that's when the book, like Stephanie Meyer stopped writing the book. She said she wasn't gonna release it because it got leaked, and I remember reading that, and I remember as like a teenager I was like so enthralled by like Edward's perspective, and I thought it was like really gritty, and I thought it was gonna be great. So of course if I read Life and Death, I figured like what better way to round out this like revisiting of Twilight than reading Midnight Sun, which again I wanted to read Twilight without rereading Twilight, and I was always interested in like if she was ever going to finish Midnight Sun, and so I guess now that she has, I might as well see what became of the story. So yeah, I will read Midnight Sun next and see how I feel about that, because like I said, this ended differently. I honestly don't remember how Twilight ended, so reading Midnight Sun will like remind me of how that story ended, and it'll still be from a fresh perspective, even though I'm sure it's going to be very similar to Life and Death, which it's crazy to me that Stephanie Meyer was able to write the same book 3 times. Wild. Like she just took the same book 3 times and rewrote it in a little changes here and there, but it's the same story that she wrote 3 times. And every time we pick it up, I don't know. I say we because like I used to be a Twilight fan. I'm not a fan anymore. But like when I saw that Life and Death was a thing, and then I saw that Midnight Sun came out, I was like, well, I might as well buy them. And even people that buy them to rip on them, it's like, we know what we're getting into, right? But we still do it. It's like, I don't know. Stephanie Meyer, she's like pulling the puppet strings out there. I don't know what she's doing. She's sprinkling some kind of magic on these books, because I don't know what it is about the story, but like she can rewrite it 3 times and people will read it 3 times. I don't know what that says. So yeah, I don't know. That's really, I keep looking at this book like, is there more to it? Is there more? But there really is no more. It's Twilight 2.0 with slightly more interesting main characters for some reason. Again, I'm trying to think of why Bo is more intriguing to me than Belle, and I can't. I can't think of why. I also can't understand why she didn't swap Charlie and Renee, but those are questions I probably will never get the answers to. So yeah, thanks for watching. Let me know if you guys have any questions for me. You can leave them in the comment section. Any ideas for like you want me to do in any other videos, you can leave those there. So yeah, the next one hopefully will be my little review of Midnight Sun. If not, it could be something else, because if I feel like doing something else, I'm gonna do something else. So we know how these videos go. So yeah, thanks for watching. I will see you guys next time. Bye.